What is coaching, and what are the basic key skills that will enable someone to use coaching as part of their role of being a mentor? So the objectives are that at the end of this session you'll be able to examine a process for coaching a student, assess and demonstrate the key skills in coaching, and evaluate the use of coaching in mentoring. Here's an exercise to start you thinking about coaching. Write down what is coaching, and why would you want to coach a student? I wonder what your thoughts were about what is coaching. Here's one definition which is helpful in thinking about helping a student. Coaching is a platform for questioning assumptions, stimulating reflection, creating alternatives, and growing perspectives. So coaching is very much about using questions as a tool to help someone progress and learn. It's about helping someone learn the most from their experiences through the use of questions. Coaching is consciously and explicitly directed at improving the individual's capacity whilst achieving objectives. So it's about improving someone's performance and so helping them achieve their own and the organisation's goals. While sometimes aimed at remedying a gap or correcting a fault, it's often focused on readying someone for increased responsibilities and speeding acclimation to a new challenge. So it can be helpful when there are gaps in their performance or they're not doing something to standard, but also it's useful for getting someone ready for increased new responsibilities. So with a student, all of these reasons may be important. It's useful to have some structure onto which to base your coaching with the student. This model is used by Pegg in his book, The Art of Mentoring, although the model's origins are unclear. First of all is to consider the challenge that the student wants to address. Then get them to think about the choices and options that are open to them. Then get them to consider the consequences of each of the choices. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of each option? And then from the options to decide on a creative solution, and finally to ensure that the student is committed to the action and decision that they've made. There are other models and you may want to explore those later. For the time being, we're going to focus on how you can use this one. Pegg describes two ways of helping people, pulling or pushing. Pulling involves creating a space for your student where they feel very comfortable to share their thoughts and challenges. The mentor helps by listening, paying great attention to what is happening with the student, and then asking powerful questions. On the other hand, there is pushing, where the mentor will stimulate and offer ideas, challenges, learning, stories, tools, and wisdom from their own experience. Most effective mentors are very good at managing the balance between these two, and this usually means more pulling than pushing. Coaching is about pulling, and the key skill is that of asking empowering questions. So why questions? The purpose of mentoring and coaching is to empower someone so they can learn and develop and achieve what they want. This means learning to work things out for themselves. If someone is constantly being given answers, then they stop thinking for themselves and their learning is much less. That's not to say that you will never want to offer advice, and we will look at that later, but questions provide a very effective way of empowering someone. Each person will have their own perception of their situation. As a mentor, you will want to work from their way of seeing things because that is where they're starting from. That is what they understand. Questions enable you to find out what the student's perceptions of the situation are, so that they can work within their own framework. Questions enable the person to reflect on what they're doing and get the maximum learning from that process. It also teaches them how to do the reflective process for themselves, and this will be an important skill for the student to acquire and practice. Not only for their work experience, but for the rest of their lives and working activities. Skillful questions from the mentor helps the student come up with solutions which they want to put into place and are motivated to take action in. Questions are also useful to help the person decide what action they're going to take to move themselves forward. Linked to the benefit of empowerment, asking questions gradually teaches the person the way to think to work things out for themselves, and to learn how to ask themselves questions so that they can learn how to help themselves better. So what makes an empowering question? It gets the person to think in a resourceful way. If someone is going to think creatively and effectively about what they're doing, it's vital that they are in a resourceful state. This could be to do with being inspired, motivated, determined, confident, etc. So the questions want to be phrased in such a way that they will help them become more resourceful. Empowering questions usually start with what or how. Other questions, where and when and who, are good as well. Why is sometimes a useful question, but why can lead to people to go to blame and excuses. If you say to someone, "Why did you do that?" when things have not worked out well, they will often blame other people or make excuses. That doesn't help with moving forward or taking responsibility for changing things. Empowering questions assume there is a solution. If a student has a problem and hasn't been able to think through a solution, then it's so important that any questions assume that there is one and that the student will find a way to act. There is always a way to change what you're doing and try something different. Your questions want to reflect this. Questions like, what are you going to change about what you're doing? What options are open to you? Will get the student to understand that they can change. Empowering questions are focused on coming up with a solution rather than concentrating on the problem. Reflective questions are useful in order for the person to be able to explore and learn, but the questions will want to focus on what to do to move forward. Empowering questions are positive and lead to positive frames of mind. Whatever action plan a person has, that is about what the person wants rather than what they don't want, and leads them to feeling motivated and positive about it. So the questions that result in the action plan should be phrased in a way that leads to being positive. Empowering questions lead to the person taking ownership and being committed to a solution. We've already talked about blame and excuses, with comments like, "Well, I can't do anything until they change their behaviour." That's not taking ownership. And questions will want to take the student to thinking what they can do. It could be ones like, what can you do to influence them? What action can you take despite their behaviour? What can you do to help them change their behaviour? And so on. Or, how can you change the way you're thinking about this? All of these types of questions will be empowering ones. On the next 4 slides are questions that you could ask as part of the 5 C's process. Firstly, there's the challenge part. So you can ask questions like, what's the problem? What do you want to work through? Where do you ideally want to be? What parts of this are working really well at the moment? What's stopping you from being where you want to be? How have you tried to solve the problem up to now? And what were the consequences? Then we have the choices section, where you might want to ask questions like, what would happen if you did nothing? What choices are open to you? Think of one more choice. The reason for this one is that the more choices the person gives you, the more likely they are to come up with a really creative solution. And this is particularly important if they only give you one choice. Ideally, you'd want at least 3 or 4 or 5. Then there's the consequences bit. So for each of the options that they've provided, you'd want to ask them, well, what are the pluses of that option and what are the minuses? And then get them to mark each option out of 10 for its attractiveness. Then there's the creative solutions section. So you can ask them to have another look at the objectives. And can you combine bits of your options to create a better solution? Do you need someone else's input? If so, who? And what is your chosen option? And lastly, in the 5 C's process is the very important section on commitment. So you might want to ask, how committed are you to that option? And ask them to give it marks out of 10. If it's not 10 out of 10, then it's useful to ask them what would make that a 10. What is your action plan? What are your strengths in this action plan? Where might you need help? When are you going to start? All of these questions will help to gain commitment. So questions and empowering questions can be used throughout the 5 C's process. Here's an exercise to help you practice thinking of questions. Think of a problem that you have at the moment. Write out some empowering questions that you could ask yourself based on the 5 C's. And then, of course, you could answer those questions as well.